Before I begin, I would like to apologize for taking so long to finally get this out. Part of me has been afraid of releasing this because, unlike the fan fiction that I've been writing before, this is something completely new. You know, I can write a story and upload it to fanfiction.net or wherever and just be fine with that. This is something that I'm intending to publish. I'm not going to try to go to a publisher. I know better than that. I'm going to self-publish through Amazon on the Kindle. You can easily do that. There are people who have actually made money doing that, but that's not my ultimate intention with this. My ultimate intention is just to tell a story. And I'm not even trying to make a statement with this. I explained later on in the from the author section. I'm just doing this because this is a story that I've been wanting to write for a long time. I've had it since childhood in my head, and it has evolved over time. And I explain that. But I want to thank you all for waiting so long for me to finally get this out. Also, some gaming stuff is going to be coming back, but I'm not going to do that on YouTube. I may start streaming again, but that'll be on X and on Kick, not here on YouTube. But anyway, let's get on with the story and just be gentle. Thank you. Mystic Space by Michael Haney. From the author. What you are about to read has taken most of my life to finally write. It began in my childhood as a game my friends and I played in my parents' basement with Star Wars action figures. The story stuck with me, living in the back of my mind, brewing for years. What it is today is completely different from the idea I began with all those years ago. I matured and my story idea matured with me. Many things have influenced its evolution. My love of anime is perhaps the biggest influence. Anime pulled me through some of the darkest moments of my life. In the late 90s and early 2000s, I was caught in the grips of a deep depression. Watching anime on Toonami was how I escaped from the pain. Looking back, I know it was unhealthy, and my wife at the time was not supportive. I think she knew something was wrong, but instead of helping, she grew bitter. At the same time, I didn't know how to ask for help, and in some ways, I was afraid to ask. Ultimately, depression ruined my marriage and estranged me from my kids. I'm still here because I changed environments and had supportive friends around me. In the end, my ex-wife and I became friends before she passed away, but my relationship with my kids wasn't great. You never get over depression. It still lingers in the background, but it no longer fully controls my life. It's been decades since I had thoughts about ending it all. I'm sorry if all of this was such a Debbie Downer, but you need to understand how I got here, how I came to be where I am now, finally ready to tell the story that's been brewing in the back of my head all these years. Several things have influenced my decision to start writing. Very recently, as of last year, the story has changed so much it is unrecognizable from the original concept. Nearly everything has changed. Current events have also had an influence. This is why my main protagonist is a girl instead of a guy. In the era of the girl boss, my main character doesn't have power handed to her on a silver platter simply because she's female. She struggles, goes through hardship, and worked hard to become a force of nature. Her story follows the hero's journey paradigm, which many modern authors have chosen to abandon because of the false narrative that it is somehow bad. This is why so many modern stories today in movies, TV shows, and video games are so terrible. Just like Rifujin Nagonate, I hope I pronounced that correctly, author of Masuko Tensei, I am not writing to validate the modern audience narrative, nor am I writing to push against it. I'm writing for myself. I'm writing the story that I want to tell, and if people like it, then that's great. And if some people don't like it, that's okay too. What I will not do is compromise my vision, nor self-censor for any reason. Anime isn't the only thing that had an influence on this story. In 1997, I went to a movie theater with my friends to see a film called Event Horizon. It wasn't my first introduction to cosmic horror, but this movie left an impression. Over the years, it has slowly creeped its way into my ideas. As you might have guessed, I'm also a fan of the supernatural. In addition to this story, I'm also working on another which connects to this one in a kind of multiverse. We'll see how it goes, but I need to get this story started first. So now you know how I got here and where I stand. I'm now 55 years old, and telling this story is long past due. It has gestated in my brain for long enough, and ready or not, I'm finally presenting it to the world. I've given thought to writing this as a light novel. My intention is to self-publish on the Kindle, and if it does well, I'll hire a native speaker to translate this work to Japanese. Maybe I can get someone to do a manga adaptation. Novels from the West became manga and anime before, so, I can dream, can't I? Anyway, I hope you enjoy this work, and if you don't, that's okay too. At the end of the day, this story isn't meant to convey a political message. It is meant to simply entertain. Please enjoy. Synopsis. Ever since she was a child, Lyra knew she was different from other children. She has abilities that no one else had. She and her grandfather lived far from civilization, on the outskirts of a distant colony on the edge of the galaxy. When an enemy Lyra didn't know existed, with motivations she didn't understand, forces her to leave the only home she's ever known, she is forced to both embark on a dangerous journey across the stars and a voyage to understand who and what she is. When she is finally ready to confront her pursuers, a deeper, more terrifying secret is revealed. Lyra must then make a choice: run away to the farthest reaches of space to hide, or stand and fight. Mystic Space is a meshing of science fiction and fantasy with a generous helping of Lovecraftian cosmic horror. It tells the story of a young girl who is caught up in events far beyond her control. Events that could reshape the galaxy into a new golden age, or a nightmare from which no one will ever awaken. Chapter 1. Lyra stopped her skimmer bike, pulled out a pair of range optics, and surveyed the landscape. The land all around was gently rolling hills of rock, dirt, and small clumps of hardy vegetation. The locals called it the Stone Sea. The air was cold but not frigid. This latitude of Transtar received the most light from the nearby white dwarf, which cast everything in a perpetual twilight and kept temperatures to a somewhat more survivable range. Her range optics didn't pick up any movement or heat sources, except for heat rising from her destination. It was still many kilometers away. The place was the tallest feature in an otherwise almost featureless landscape. It consisted of a collection of large boulders, and from within rose a column of thick steam. Reasonably satisfied that she was alone, Lyra stowed the range optics in the bike's saddlebag. Skimmer bike made a soft humming as she pressed the throttle. It wasn't long before she reached her destination. Lyra climbed off the skimmer bike, then pushed it towards a natural archway in the massive stone wall. Beyond the archway, on the other side of the boulders, was an opening space large enough for several such bikes. Anyone who happened to come by this place would assume nobody was here. Not that many people came out to such a remote location. Only a few locals from the colony even knew this place was here. Lyra pulled a large leather duffel bag from the saddlebag and headed further in. The boulders formed a natural staircase which led to a large open space surrounded by walls of natural rock. In the center was a hot spring, which was the source of the pillar of steam. The hot water poured out from a series of small fissures in the rock wall into a large pool. One fissure, which sat far to the side of the pool, was very wide and poured out onto a flat rocky ground. The water there flowed into natural openings where the ground sloped slightly. Lyra set her bag down just to the edge of this formation to keep it out of the water. From it, she pulled out a resolite basin, 3 small bottles, and a compact folding stool. After taking just a moment to listen for any sounds of approach, hearing nothing, Lyra started undoing the clasp on the front of her leather thermal jacket. Under that, she wore a simple blue pullover synth thread shirt. She pulled this off over her head, folded it neatly, and set it aside with her jacket. At a touch, the clasps on her thermal boots came undone, and she stepped out barefoot on the warm stone floor. Her thermal trousers came next, and under those she wore gray synth thread pants. These she pulled off, folded, and set aside. All that remained were her Neuroform comfort wear. The top came off first, disconnecting at the front at her touch. Then the bottoms released at the sides, and these were set aside. The air felt wonderfully warm on Lyra's bare skin. She inspected herself, admiring the curve of her hips and the roundness of her small yet well-formed bosom, and the shape of her well-toned legs. Her skin was the color of light bronze, which was normal for most New Sapiens. Her waist-length hair was the color of freshly fallen snow. Lyra was a natural beauty, despite her very short stature. Ever since she reached the age of the change, she always drew attention whenever she visited the colony because she was so small. For Lyra, her looks and lack of height were part gift, part burden. Luckily, the colony received few visitors. It was a home for the miners and their families who worked for the Transtar Mining Consortium. Anyone there was used to her by now. She didn't stand out as much anymore. Only recently had she reached the age of majority. She was finally an adult. Lyra picked up the bottles and put them in the resolite basin, then went to the wide fissure. After unfolding the stool, she sat it just in front of the curtain of warm water pouring from the fissure and sat down. After setting the bottles aside, she filled the basin with warm water and poured it over her head. Beads of hot but not scalding water rolled off her skin and dripped from her now drenched hair. Bottles contained shampoo and skin cleanser. She first worked the shampoo into her hair, working up a thick lather. Then she switched to the skin cleanser, which contained a fine pumice to exfoliate the skin. When she was done, Lyra surveyed her work. She was covered in suds from head to toe, which she was careful to work into every part of her body. She liked the small hygiene pod back home, but the processed hot water was no substitute for the soothing, mineral-rich waters of the hot spring. The pod also didn't have anywhere she could just soak and relax. After rinsing away the suds, Lyra slipped into the warm waters of the pool. Because of her smallness, she easily sank down to her neck and wasn't even that far into the pool yet. The warm waters felt so relaxing. Though her home had an envirosystem that warmed the air, she never truly felt warm, except for the rare times when she was here. Transtar was cold, not dangerously so near the equator, but it had an ever-present chill that somehow found a way to seep into your bones, no matter how warmly you dressed. It was unpleasant, but it was manageable. Except when Transtar slipped behind the shadows of Zartania. Transtar was in fact a moon, orbiting an average-sized blue ice giant with rings. During Shadowfall, the winds blew intensely, the temperatures dropped to dangerous levels, and the moisture of the air fell and formed ice crystals on any surface that they touched. The next Shadowfall was at least a month away. Technically, it was summer in the colony. Not that anyone noticed. Time seemed to have little meaning while she was soaking in the warm, mineral-rich waters, but Lyra knew she couldn't stay here forever. After about an hour, she climbed from the pool, water beating off her light bronze skin. She gathered her things at the wide fissure and put them away in her duffel bag. Then Lyra dried herself with a towel. The only matter was her hair. If she rode out on the bike in this cold, with her hair wet, it would be frozen by the time she got home. She only ever did this when she was alone, and never where others could see. Lyra closed her eyes and put her hand on her temples. The air around her body seemed to waver for a moment, and then there was a sudden sound, like a sudden rush of wind. Lyra's hair blew into the air as if a gust had blown through. But the air was still. She reached up, touched her hair, and smiled when she found it was completely dry. With this done, Lyra dressed herself. As she reached for her thermal jacket, she heard an alert tone come from the small comlink clipped to the front vest. "Hello?" she said after unclipping the device. A gruff voice replied, "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for over an hour." "I'm at the hot springs, grandfather." Lyra rolled her eyes. "I told you I was coming here today." She could hear grumbling sounds from the other end. It was clear he'd forgotten. Again. After a short pause, her grandfather replied, "Well, get back here as soon as you can. We're going to have a visitor today." Visitors to their home were rare. Lyra knew her grandfather valued their privacy, which was why they didn't live inside the colony. But when someone did visit them, that usually meant only one thing. "Is it Duran?" Lyra asked excitedly. She always loved it when he came to visit. He was a friend of her grandfather's. She had no idea how exactly they became friends, but he came to visit them a few times every cycle. Every time he visited, he'd bring her something, a small souvenir from the many different exotic places around the galaxy he often traveled. "Who else comes to see us?" he replied. "Yes!" Lyra pumped her fist. "What was that? I couldn't hear you," her grandfather replied. Lyra hastily answered, "Nothing. I'm on my way back." She climbed onto her skimmer bike, throttled the engine, and sped out through the stone arch. The terrain of the stone sea raced beneath the bike, and the cold wind whipped at Lyra's hair. After several minutes, tall objects began to appear on the horizon. These were the tops of great fungal trees that grew in the spore forest, the only place on Transtar that could be called a forest. The fungus weren't poisonous and flourished in the cold environment, so the colonists often harvested the trees for food. They could also be burned for heat or allowed to ferment to make a beer that was popular with the miners. Some were so large that a whole fungal tree could feed the entire colony for 2 whole cycles. Lyra's route took her through the forest. The stalks of the giant fungal trees were massive. Some were as wide as buildings. They grew in clumps of several sizes. Some clumps consisted of dozens of fungal trees, while some only had 5 or 6. Lyra weaved through the clumps, or went straight through the ones that were spaced wide apart. Younger, much shorter fungal trees grew in the wide spaces between some of the clumps. Lyra grabbed a few of these as her bike sped past, their stalks breaking easily. The stalks of the bigger trees were far stronger and couldn't be cut without special tools. Weaving around one particularly large grove of fungal trees, Lyra found herself racing towards a large rock. The rock suddenly rose into the air, allowing Lyra to pass underneath, though she had to duck her head. She stopped some distance on the other side and looked back. The stone gank had been startled out of its nap by her skimmer's bike's engines. The bulky creature lifted its ponderous body on 4 enormously bulbous legs. The outer carapace of the gank resembled stone, which served as camouflage. The creature didn't have a mouth, but instead several long tentacle-like proboscis, which bore into the tough outer skin of the fungal trees to get to the softer tissues underneath. "Sorry," she waved to the creature. The stone gank were known to be easy to startle. They often had a tendency to stampede, but this one remained calm. It seemingly waved back with its tentacles, then settled back down to the ground to resume its nap, blending into the environment like an ordinary boulder. This section of the spore forest wasn't as deep and soon opened back up to the gently rolling terrain of the stone sea. Just beyond the forest's edge was a huge geological formation resembling a great tear in the ground. Lyra steered onto a slope leading into the tear, and soon it flattened out, forming a kind of miniature valley. 3 structures stood in the area where the floor of the miniature valley was widest. The largest was a greenhouse. Next to it, connected via a sealed tubular corridor, was the main house. Lyra turned towards the third building, a vehicle bay. The vehicle bay served as both a workshop and a garage. Next to where she parked the bike was an old skimmer car, a 2-seater with a transparent synth steel canopy that shielded against the cold wind. Along the walls were racks holding hundreds of different types of tools. A fabricator, a large machine which can produce objects by extruding many types of materials, sat to a far corner. The vehicle bay was directly connected to the house. The above-ground portion was mostly storage. The main residence was underground. A modest network of rooms and corridors had been hewn from the rock by a powerful plasma cutter. It was built underground partially due to the extreme cold during shadowfall and as partial protection from radiation. Transtar briefly transited a band of radiation whirling around the ice giant at its equator. Passing the door which opened to the greenhouse, Lyra stepped onto a sloping ramp which went down a distance, and then a spiral that came back around under the storehouse. It continued down for several loops before finally opening into a mudroom. Thermalware and enviro gear hung from hooks on the walls. On either side of the room were a pair of benches where people could sit to take off their boots. On the opposite wall from the entrance was a door that led into the house. There was also a notch on the floor that held a device for cleaning mud from your boots. Lyra changed out of her thermalware and traded her boots for a pair of plain slippers. Beyond the door, she entered a foyer with entrances leading to other parts of the house. Lyra heard a sound to the right that led towards the room where she and her grandfather entertained the guests. She hurried in that direction with the glee of a small child running towards the sitting room. "Uncle Duran!" he called out happily, seeing an ebony-skinned man sitting opposite from her grandfather in a semicircular nook built into the wall. Many hundreds of light years away, a woman wearing a crisp black uniform walked with purpose through the halls of her ship. The golden dagger pips on her shoulder signified her as a general. Men and women in front of her threw themselves against the wall of the corridor and flashed her a salute as she passed. The woman paid them no mind. After rounding a corridor, 3, 2, 1. After rounding a corner, the woman entered a large command center. Floor was bowl-like with terminals in 2 sets of semicircular stations, which overlooked a large holographic display at the center in the lower part of the room. The moment she entered the room, a man called out for attention. "Jenner on the bridge!" Everyone stopped what they were doing and stood at attention. "As you were," the woman ordered, her voice deep and commanding. Everyone returned to their work. She continued on through the room, stepping down towards the lower section with the holographic display. Opposite of the entrance, sitting between 2 sets of terminal stations, sat a single terminal. The general sat down at that terminal, withdrew a small cylinder from the front of her pocket of her uniform jacket, and inserted it into a round socket along the side of the terminal. The machine activated, its array of 3 displays coming to life. "Open comms," the general barked. The hologram at the center of the room blinked and changed from a chart of the local star system to that of a tall man draped in black robes. "General Redbon," the man in the hologram nodded his head, acknowledging her. "Inquisitor Margus," Redbon replied, giving him a similar nod. "We are honored. What is your reason for contacting us? We are currently on an important mission for the Imperium." The Inquisitor frowned. "Your hunt for the terrorist Orn Quintaran is cancelled." General Redbon did not let her surprise show. The Inquisitor would have seen it as a sign of weakness. "May I ask why?" she demanded coolly. "We are very close to finding where he is operating from and who his associates are," the Inquisitor replied. "A far more important matter has arisen. Tell me, General, do you recognize this woman?" An image of a stunningly beautiful woman with short white hair appeared in the hologram. "I am familiar with her," Redbon nodded. "She was Amara Starseed, former leader of the dissidents known as the Order of Mystics. 19 years ago, an entire battalion, backed up by 4 platoons of elite hunter-seekers, were sent to Tantalus to capture her. After 3 days, she killed nearly half of them before she died from her wounds." The Inquisitor reappeared on the hologram. "Yes, her loss was a major blow to the Imperium. Though we have her body kept in stasis, her DNA alone was not sufficient for our needs, and the few clones we made of her have met with no success." Then what does that have to do with me? Redbond finally asked. The Inquisitor straightened his back, perhaps to look more imposing. We have re-examined the body and found new data. Please get to the point. Redbond tapped her finger on her console impatiently. The Inquisitor frowned. She was pregnant, or had been at least 7 days before her death. Based on trace DNA in the womb, there is a high probability the child was female. She had a daughter. The general voiced her surprise. The Inquisitor nodded. A thorough search was done of the area after the battle. Nothing was found. A suspected associate of the terrorist organization known as the Guardians had been on Tantalus at the same time. The investigators at the time felt his presence was unrelated to the case, so they never tried to ascertain his whereabouts. That was an odd piece of data to ignore. These investigators were clearly either foolish or traitors. Redbond frowned. Who is this person? Zevis or Tano? The Inquisitor replied. The war hero, Redbond mused, running her fingers through her short blonde hair. During the Trans-System Guild War, he held the capital of Tarsonis for 6 days against an overwhelming force of the skeleton crew. Do we know his current whereabouts? No. Inquisitor Margus shook his head. However, we have intel that suggests he is somewhere in the Sector 3 fringe systems. Redbond tapped a few buttons on her terminal, and a star chart of that region of the galaxy appeared on her display. There are dozens of systems in that sector, she said. Of the 82 systems, only 30 are officially known to be inhabited, she added. And 4 of those were Stellar Union Navy outposts during the war. Belargo, Temis, Anaxus, and Transtar. Then you know your mission, General, the Inquisitor told her. She nodded. We will begin searching these systems immediately, starting with Belargo. The Inquisitor replied, his voice carrying a hint of menace. The daughter of Starseed must be captured alive. Like her mother, she is of no use to us dead. This is of the utmost importance, General. You can rest assured, Inquisitor Margus, General Redbond said proudly. The apparatus has never failed a mission. And that concludes Chapter 1. Sorry for any mistakes or anything that I made during the reading. I'm getting a little better at this. There's a reason why I don't read from a script. It's because of my vision. But I am getting a little better at it. This was the first chapter. I hope you liked it. I can't tell you when Chapter 2 will be ready, but I will post it online when it is ready. Thank you for listening, and let me know what you think in the in the comment section below. Thank you very much for waiting for me to finally get this out. I've been Mike TheZorch, and I will see you guys next time.